stick to. I will say we may not go as long as we had anticipated, or we may find that we hit right on schedule. So I want to go ahead and just say that's kind of a rough guide to how we hope our presentation will go. And so I guess first and foremost, just to give you a little introduction into the response, we have a very good infographic here that USDA has created that kind of has a timeline process, a guide to help you understand the response process. We will make all of these links available to you. We can email you a Word document that will allow you to link to these, but we'll also be recording this webinar so that you can go back and reference it as you need to. So please, again, if you have any questions, we'll address those in the section, but this is a great reference for folks who may want to look back and just have a very 40,000-foot view of what a response looks like. So today, we are going to approach this from the index farm scenario. And so rather than considering a larger multi-farm outbreak, we're going to focus on the idea that we have an individual premises that is infected, and there's a surrounding control zone established. And this approach is from the initial detection in the state, and what would happen if we were contacted, if it was your premises, that sort of thing. So the first thing that's going to happen is typically somebody calls our office and says, I've noticed sick birds, or a company, a veterinarian may reach out to us and say, hey, I think this is what we have. And we will have that veterinarian send in samples, or we will send a foreign animal disease diagnostician out to collect those samples. And we will give that investigation a foreign animal disease number. And then we will proceed with sampling or testing here at our NALM lab. So if it's the first case of HPAI in a state, the initial detection must be confirmed by the National Veterinary Services Laboratory in Ames, Iowa, before USDA will authorize response activities. That includes indemnity and compensation, as it says there, for depopulation and disposal. So after that initial detection, let's say that the cord lab took a set of samples and they have a presumptive positive. They send it to NVSL. It is confirmed positive. That initiation, or that initial detection, will allow us to act on future positive detections out of the cord lab without confirmation from NVSL before proceeding. All of our samples are forwarded on for confirmation, but we may actually start our response activities before we get those results from NVSL. So we have a little, thing there on retesting. So retesting differs based on sick bird samples or regulatory testing. So a few examples of that might be if a company is doing routine sampling as part of their AI surveillance in the company, and they get a suspect or a non-negative, we may send someone out to retest, or we may ask them to resubmit samples. We're also going to look at the actual clinical signs of the animals, and while we're getting those retest samples. Regulatory testing, we do an awful lot of NPIP surveillance out of this office, and so on occasion we will have an animal who that is submitted that is a non-negative, and so we will collect additional samples there, looking again at the clinical signs. Once we're pretty convinced that we have a true defined case of high-path avian influenza, we're going to start looking at things like the EpiLinks, and we're going to start working on the indemnity forms. And so what are EpiLinks? EpiLinks are potentially anything that may have a relationship to that premises that has created an opportunity for the disease to be introduced there. So whether that's having an association with other premises where there are live poultry, using a common feed deliverer who may go to multiple premises, that kind of thing. That's what we start looking at. So what are response goals and policy? So as it says here, it is to detect, control, and contain HPAI in poultry as quickly as possible. And we want to eradicate the virus to prevent spread, if at all possible. We want to be sure and facilitate continuity of business for non-infected animals and non-contaminated animal products. The objective being to allow the U.S. to regain disease-free status and avoid disruption and damage from the disease outbreak itself. So when we have a detection of high-path avian influenza, pretty immediately trade restrictions will go into place from other countries, and the goal is to get us back in business as quickly as possible. Stamping out is the USDA policy on foreign animal disease, and it has been a very effective policy. But that does, require that that essentially, if you have a farm that has 10 barns and one barn you have a detection, the other 9 barns will need to be depopulated, even if the birds are not testing positive yet. There have been some discussion in the last little bit about, the stamping out policy, and it doesn't seem to be very effective. And I think it's probably the most effective way to address the situation. So epidemiological principles. So you have an infected premises. The first thing you want to look at is preventing contact between the high-path AI virus and susceptible poultry. So one of the things we'll do when we have a non-negative or we suspect that there is a disease issue, high-path AI, we're going to place a quarantine. Once we have confirmation of a non-negative, we've confirmed that it is truly a positive high-path, we're going to go ahead and establish control zones. And then there'll be movement controls placed on that quarantine premises and inside the control area. And we want people to set up biosecurity procedures for enhanced biosecurity. We're going to talk about that a little more in a bit. But we want, beyond the scope of peacetime biosecurity practices, the establishment of some heightened procedures. We want to stop the production of high-path AI virus by infected or exposed animals. So thus the stamping out policy, rapid mass depopulation and disposal. And then increasing the disease resistance of susceptible poultry and emergency vaccination if available. So this is listed as an option. It's not an option we employ. It is an option that we leave on the table to be considered if we are in a situation where we're having difficulty controlling a disease outbreak. Thus far, that has not been something that has had to have been done, and it is something that would be initiated by our USDA counterparts. So this is just kind of a decision tree to help you understand what we do if we perform a retest or we have a sample come in that's inconclusive. The lab is going to retest the same sample. And if it's negative, there will be no additional action. But if we get an inconclusive sample again or a non-negative, we're going to retest the premises. We may have somebody resubmit. And this little square here is a good brief summary of testing requirements. So we do a minimum of 30 samples from each premises. So, and that is 11, usually 10 to 11 samples per barn. If you only have 2 barns, we're still going to want 30 samples, and you're going to target sick animals or deceased animals when you're taking samples. So that's just a reference to go back and look at if you have questions about testing, and certainly we're glad to answer any questions that you have, even in outbreak or outside of this webinar. So you have a confirmed positive at the NALM lab, and so what will happen next? And we're going to talk a little bit about indemnity and compensation. So we have a confirmed positive at a non-lab. The indemnity form must go through an appraisal process. Appendix 1H is a form that has to be completed by the area veterinarian in charge, which is what AVIC stands for veterinary services. The veterinary services, national incident coordinator, the company, and the grower. And then Appendix 2A is for the poultry owner, and 2B is for the contract grower, because sometimes those are different. There are a few situations where they are the same. So one of the things to be aware of that is needed immediately is the number of birds on the day that mortality is noted, all the daily mortality sheets, the numbers of barns, and the dimensions of each barn. Floor raised birds, square footage, cage birds, cubic footage. And so we can't proceed with any sort of depopulation activity until the indemnity appraisal is initiated by USDA. There are some wet signatures that are required before we can get started. And this link in this slide, like I said, we'll have a list of links for you. But you can click on this link and get more information about exactly how indemnity and compensation works. This is the main page for high path avian influenza, and this is kind of a busy page, but it has lots of great information. If you are linked to this page and you go look at response and policy information, you click on these carrots, those will drop down and you will see all kinds of links for other reference documents. So indemnity. So we talked a little bit about the 1H. So the 1H is the indemnity and compensation request for high path AI. One of the things that you'll hear me say over and over again during this webinar is that a premises ID is necessary to receive appraisal or to receive indemnity. It is ideal if people have a premises ID prior to the onset of an outbreak. Also, that they have some sort of plan for how they'll manage an outbreak at their farm, and also a biosecurity plan. But you can see in this slide, the actual first page, it's 1 of 3 for the 1H. You're going to, list some obvious things: state, county, site number. You will need to know, your barn numbers, again, the numbers of birds, sexes, age, type, and then the case manager, and we'll discuss that person later as well, is going to help you work on the price per bird. So if the flock has more than 500 birds or a total indemnity and compensation cost more than $10,000, you would use the 1H form. And again, this is not something that we would anticipate that you would pull up and start to fill out yourself. This is something that we're going to bring to you to help you fill it out. But this is the information. This is more of information that we need to help get things moving. Of note is that USDA does not pay for deceased birds. So you need the total numbers of live birds as early in the detection as you can possibly get it. And so I will give an example. Companies are doing their due diligence. They're reaching out to us and saying, hey, we've got increased mortality. We've noticed it for the last 3 days. And let's say it's going to be the following morning before we can get somebody on site. We'll go ahead and have you get us some numbers then and start submitting things to us to try to get an accurate reflection of the numbers of live birds that you have. We've had this happen with, inclement weather. When we've had freezing weather, we've gone ahead and had people say, submit me your total numbers of live birds, because we knew that we might not be able to deploy people for the next, 8 to 12 hours. And we wanted to try to get the numbers to reflect accurately as to the time when we were notified by the company that they had an issue. Again, this is just the 1H. This is, if you look at number 10, talks about any additional barns on the premises, their dimensions. So that calculates into later what you are reimbursed for virus elimination. And we'll talk about that a little more as well. The state animal health official and the area veterinarian in charge, along with the poultry owner or grower and the national incident coordinator, will all need to sign off on this document before depopulation can proceed. And a wet signature is required from our poultry owner, grower, and our SAHO, or state animal health official. So 2A is where we kind of break that 1H down. 2A is the draft for the poultry owner. So this may be the company, this may be the same person that owns the premises, but at either rate, the poultry owner is going to be asked to complete this form. Again, a premises ID is required for the location of the birds. And then we'll go through the detection, presumptive positive, and fill out this form, which this does not have to be signed to completion before we can kind of initiate activities, but it's, and maybe I should double check on that. Dr. Balzrak, are you on the phone? Or Dr. Schmock?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor. I played one on
sorry.
stage before, but that's okay.
Okay. So does the 2A need to be signed before we can proceed with depopulation?
No, we need it. The main thing is that we have a confirmation that is positive, but this does not need to be signed.
Okay, but the 1H is definitely
yes, correct.
Important piece. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Appendix 2B is the draft for the contract grower, so the folks who own the premises. And this, plays in when you have reimbursement for virus elimination activities, including disinfection, and again, what we call virus elimination. And so not to forget that we also see high-path avian influenza in our backyard flocks. So there's a separate form for those folks. And if any of those folks are on the line, most all of this is very applicable that you'll be seeing in this webinar. It's just modified to a different degree for our backyard folks. So again, a premises ID, location, and, we're trying to find out or trying to get indemnity established there. And a 2H would have to be completed before we could start depopulation on a backyard premises. Part of the paperwork that we do, or I said that we do, part of what we fill out, the flock plan, it's an important document. It helps us to notify our USDA counterparts about the activities that we have that are ongoing and how we accomplish different goals of the response. But in summary, documents producers' intention to eliminate high-path avian influenza from their premises and maintain stringent biosecurity measures to prevent transmission or future introduction of the virus. This is an agreement between APHIS, the state animal health official, the poultry owner, and the contract grower, acknowledging regulatory intervention and requirements to release state and/or federal quarantine and be eligible for additional APHIS payments. Describes methods used for depopulation, disposal, and virus elimination. So if you choose to use cervical dislocation for depopulation, then that would be listed in that flock plan. If disposal is composting, that will also be listed in the flock plan. And virus elimination, that would be the description of how you're going to clean, what disinfectants you may be applying, that sort of thing. Completion of the flock plan is not required for indemnity payments for birds or eggs, but it's required for indemnity payments for materials. So for reimbursement for the quantities of Virkon that you may be using when you are using wet disinfection. And so here is a copy of the commercial flock plan. This is something that your case manager will be working through. It's not something we anticipate that you would be completing, but we would ask for your input when we are completing this. And you can see it's 6 pages long. And we have a link to that we can provide you. And so you've heard me mention the case manager. Case manager is a member of our field ops or our operation group in the incident management team. We use the incident command system, or ICS, as part of our response activities, or how we structure the response, I should say. This is the same system that's used by FEMA and our TEMA colleagues here in the state, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency. And so to introduce you to this, there are certain positions that are, part of what we call our command and general staff, but we have, I may have put the wrong. So this is our operations section chief, and there's actually a larger incident group, but there is an incident commander, and that would be usually your state animal health official and your area veterinarian in charge. And then that's broken down into 4 different branches, and that is your planning section, your logistics section, your ops section, and I'm forgetting a section. Whitney, if you want to jump in there, that would be great.
There's a finance section too.
Finance section, sorry. So those are the 4 main sections. And then this is one of those sections, because this is the section where you're going to be having the most interaction. So the ops section chief is the person who's responsible for making sure that all of our response activities on the ground are completed and completed according to the policy guidance. And that person plugs in with the rest of the command and general staff every day, multiple times a day, to make sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to the response. If we're meeting the guidelines and the goals of the response as laid out by our USDA counterparts. And so the ops section chief for us is Dr. Smart. And one of the things, let's see, next slide, is case management. So as your state veterinarian, I would say, I am available to you as much as I possibly can be during an incident, and I want to work with you and engage with you. We do assign specific case managers to each premises, though, to prevent confusion from getting information from multiple people. So one of our case managers is Vera Fairfield. Vera would be the direct liaison with the company and with the producer to make sure that there's a continuous flow of communication to the producer and to the company, but also back to the incident management team. This person is going to look at your facilities, look at the numbers of birds that you have, may make recommendations back to the incident management team and to the incident command about how to depopulate, best methods for disposal, capabilities on a farm. Is there space for disposal? The case manager is just very pivotal in all the activities that are happening during a response on an infected premises. We have our field reimbursement highlighted there. That's going to be a critical person, because that person is going to work with the poultry owner and also potentially the company to make sure that all of the reimbursement indemnity is all completed. And that person is trained to manage and help the case manager complete forms and to manage the flow of indemnity monies. The other person that I will mention on this group that isn't highlighted is the site manager. Site managers are really important because they help restrict the flow of traffic and also consequently of disease on and off the farm. So your site manager is typically the person who is managing logs of people who are showing up to work at the site. That doesn't necessarily, that includes everyone. That's the best way to state that. that means the people who work for the company will need to check in, and also the people who are working for regulatory services will need to check in. We need a good idea of how many people are on site every day for a multitude of different reasons, primarily safety, but also we're going to have folks who are going to be making sure that people are moving on and off of a premises and doing it in a way that prevents the spread of disease. And that's this person's responsibility. So while you may not be talking to them a lot, that person is pivotal, and it's the expectation of the state veterinarian's office and USDA staff that the people on the ground will be respectful and follow direction of the site manager, because their role really is to keep this disease contained to this premises and prevent it from moving somewhere else. And so if someone stops you and says, hey, you need to wash your truck, you need to wash your truck. So that's an important piece that we want to make sure people understand. So I'm going to stop there and we'll go back. Does anybody have any questions about incident command and about indemnity that they would like to have us answer? Dr. Smart, is there anything in the chat? I'm not able to see that part.
I don't see anything in the chat right now.
Okay, perfect. Next, we're going to go to zones and premises definitions. This is to help you better understand how regulatory agencies